I rescued him, he was 5. So he's very mellow, you know, a mama's boy, but that's okay.
Okay, well, friends, it's now 1 minute after 6, so I think we're about ready to go. I want to welcome you. This is our concluding Lenten series presentation. This year we've been looking at widening our awareness of our community and the need for justice, for diversity in our communities. We've had a wide variety of presentations coming at this from several different directions, trying to broaden our awareness and return, encourage our engagement on this issue. We've had a presentation about Lewes and its community, the church and its history with the African-American community. We've also had wonderful presentation from Amy Weiss last week on just the experience of culture, particularly literature from African Americans. And we also had a wonderful presentation from the Shalem program on Howard Thurman. Tonight is the next step. So this has just been sticking your little big toe into the water. And now in a more intentional program that the Episcopal Church is putting out is called the Sacred Ground Program. And we're privileged to have 2 of our own to present tonight on the Sacred Ground Program. There are others who I know who are on this call who have also been involved in bringing sacred ground to the parish. I'm sure Carlyle and Carol will share them with you. But I just want to remind you to please mute yourself if you're not talking. That'll help us be able to maintain the camera on the speakers. You also may want to go to the upper right-hand corner of your window and click on view and then select speaker view. And that way you won't be distracted by anything else as Carlyle and Carol are presenting. So Carol, as you know, has had a distinguished career in service to our country in the United States State Department and in the Peace Corps. Carlyle has done something for the church. I'm not quite sure, but she was one of the first women ordained in the Episcopal Church, and we're privileged to have both of them as members of our church. I'm going to turn off my screen just to save on bandwidth because I'm going to have to play some videos and stuff, and sometimes that might cause problems for the presentation. But if you need me, you can reach me through the chat and you can chat with me directly. Also, if you have questions for Carlyle and Carol during their presentation, I'd encourage you to type those in the chat so you don't forget about them, but that way you won't interrupt Carol and Carlyle in trying to get the information out that they've prepared for this evening. 90% of the time, in my experience, they usually will answer the question that you had raised within a minute or 2 of you typing it into the chat automatically. So that way you won't forget it and you won't interrupt their train of thought, and that's helpful for everyone. So without further ado, I turn it over to Carlyle and Carol.
Oh, good. Well, thank you, Jeffrey. In many ways, this evening is going to not only be about sacred ground, but it will also be a little bit of an immersion into how we do sacred ground. So first, I'm going to begin with 3 biblical short quotes, and then a prayer, and then I'll say something to you about becoming the beloved community. So here we go. This one is from Micah, the prophet Micah, and I bet you all know it by heart. I know it in the King James Version, but I'll read it to you in the Revised Standard. He has told you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. Not a great quote. And the second is from the prophet Isaiah. Is this not the fast that I choose, to loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover them and not to hide yourself from your own kin. And finally, I like to end with the infamous and wise, and I've always found humorous, quote from our namesake, St. Peter, who finally got it. And when he got it, he said, "I truly understand that God shows no partiality, but in every nation, anyone who fears God and does what is right is acceptable." And so now a prayer. Actually, it's a confession and a good one. So let us pray. Almighty God, source of all that is, giver of every good gift, you create all people in your image and call us to love one another as you love us. We confess that we have failed to honor you in the great diversity of the human family. We have desired to live in freedom while building walls between ourselves and others. We have longed to be known and accepted for who we are while making judgments of others based on the color of skin or shape of features or varieties of human experience. We have tried to love our neighbors individually while yet benefiting from systems that hold those same neighbors in oppression. Forgive us, Holy God. Give us eyes to see you as you are revealed in all people. Strengthen us for the work of reconciliation rooted in love. Restore us in your image to be beloved community, united in our diversity, even as you are one with Christ and the Spirit, holy and undivided Trinity, now and forever. Amen. So that confession actually comes from the sacred ground material. And it's a good one, I think. It also then references the beloved community, which is an initiative of the National Episcopal Church, in essence, devised in 2017, but it refers actually to Martin Luther King Jr., from whom the phrase beloved community comes. Martin Luther King talked about the beloved community a lot, and it was his actual dream that that beloved community would be the end of all the work in the civil rights movement. He said, "The aftermath of nonviolence is the creation of the beloved community, so that when the battle is over, a new relationship is forged." So the Episcopal Church has taken up this work in the form of sacred ground. It frames a path for Episcopalians, not just Episcopalians, but frames a path for us to address racial injustice in all of its forms and to grow as a community of reconcilers, justice makers, and healers. It is first and foremost spiritual work. And I want to say another thing about the beloved community. I could say a lot about it, actually. If you want to see all the detail, and there's a lot of it, go to the episcopalchurch.org and look at Becoming Beloved Community. It is a incredibly smart, not to mention wise, piece of work. It, in essence, takes the baptismal covenant questions like, will you strive for justice and all of those things, love your neighbor as yourself, etc., takes them, and then under each question does detailed work about how those baptismal initiatives can be accomplished. And sacred ground is one way of doing that. I happened to look on my email today and saw something from Bishop Marianne Edgar Buddy, who is actually my bishop. She's the Bishop of Washington. And she makes the point that this year, this Easter Sunday, is actually the anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., April 4th, 1968. And she includes in her email, actually to the Diocese of Washington, some quotes from King's last sermon, which was at the National Cathedral. And one of them is this. I think it's a great quote. "We are tied together in a single garment of destiny, caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. And whatever affects one affects all indirectly. For some strange reason, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the way God's universe is made. This is the way it is structured." Anyway, it's a great sermon. You can also find it online, the whole text. It's called, the name of the sermon is called Remaining Awake Through a Great Revolution. So we're going to move now into an actual conversation about the specifics of sacred ground, always remembering that it is a way to move into and to make real the beloved community. So Jeffrey has, I think that's next, Carol, Jeffrey has a video that he's going to play for us.
Sacred Ground is a video dialogue series on race and faith. Through the stories of our culture, the stories of our sojourn here in America, the stories of race, both the joys and the sorrows, by listening to those stories and hearing them, and then telling our own stories together, and then looking possibly at the stories of our very faith. Somehow from the travail and the reality of all of those stories may emerge hope for a new day. I'm reminded that in the 3rd chapter of Exodus in the Hebrew Scriptures, when Moses climbed up Mount Sinai, and he was trying to discern whether he should go back to Egypt to help to free the Hebrew slaves, he climbed up on the mountain and saw a burning bush. And in the vision of this burning bush, he heard the voice speak to him, "Moses, Moses, take off the shoes from your feet, for the ground on which you are standing is holy ground, sacred ground." And then the voice from the bush said, "I am the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." A friend of mine many years ago preached on that text. And he said the reason that Moses was summoned to take off the shoes from his feet, because the ground on which he was standing was holy ground. Not because the dirt was holy, but because God was about to tell his story. And whenever someone tells their story, you are standing on holy ground. Sacred ground is a time, an opportunity to hear the story of our past with regard to race, to hear our stories of our past, and then to write a new story for a new future where there's plenty good room for all of God's children. God love you. God bless you. And may God hold us all in those almighty hands of love.
Carol, you're muted. Just take a second to take that in. He's such a, I think, an inspiring person. And he does a really wonderful job of describing the essence, I think, of sacred ground, which probably leads those of you who are not familiar with it to say, well, what is it? Anyhow, you know, it sounds nice, but what is it? And I wanted to just share with you something from the Sacred Ground curriculum, which I find so wonderful. It's, first of all, it's like, it's all of us in dialogue together, in a prayerful dialogue, as Carlyle said. So it opens with prayer. And after that, there's an opportunity for us to share something from our own personal lives that might be relevant to the topic of the day. So there is that kind of inside out approach. It's not about listening to someone else and having them teach us. We're teaching each other. We then go on to look at a series of films and things that we have read. Let me tell you this whole piece right here. And I think it's very well put, and it's put by the author of Sacred Ground herself. She says it's a sensitive and prayerful resource to create a space for difficult but respectful and transformative dialogues on race and racism, inviting us to walk back through history and peel away the layers that brought us to today. Many, many things that we don't know about, no matter where we came from. It's quite amazing. We can reflect on our own family's histories and stories, and also the narratives that really kind of shape our collective American story. It's a guiding star for the vision of the beloved community that Carlyle mentioned, where all people are honored and protected and nurtured as beloved children of God, and where we weep at one another's pain and seek one another's flourishing. How, you know, what a fabulous description in my view. So what we do is we meet every other week for 2 hours. So it's a commitment. There are a number of people on here who have taken Sacred Ground with Carlyle and me in the fall, and some who are taking it now. And we hope others who may be interested in doing it the next time we offer it in the fall. So it's a 2-hour commitment every other week. And in the intervening week, there are some extraordinarily powerful films, videos, and articles to read about the topic that we're covering. This course covers race in pretty much all of its permutations: Black, African American, Latinx, Asian Pacific Islander, Indigenous, Native American, and white. So you see, and the first part of the films is mostly around historical perspective. And I think it's fair to say that there was no one in our room who knew everything. One of the first things you learn is how little we do know, and how our own education system has kind of homogenized a lot of our history. It's quite eye-opening, emotional, and transformative to really hear about all of that. So that's a part of it's a lot of sharing, it's pure dialogue among all of us. That is followed by, so what does it mean today? That's what happened and what is happening now. And God knows, just looking at our history over the last few months, a lot is happening, isn't it? So really talking all of that through and bringing our own personal feelings, our own personal perspectives. What did we learn? What surprised us? How are we feeling about this? There is a lot of feeling to be expressed. And how can we support one another so that we take action afterwards? Because it's one thing to hear and learn a lot, but then there's always the question, what are you going to do, right? So part of this for the Episcopal Church, and this has been going on all over the country, so it's not just us. there are parishes and dioceses all over the country that are engaging in these dialogue circles around sacred ground. And our hope, as is the hope of everyone else, is that we will have an impact on the future and how we move forward. For us, here in Lewes, here in Rehoboth, here in Delaware as a whole, and whatever else beyond that. So, and I can tell you for myself, I have found it extraordinarily moving and extraordinarily helpful. So that's kind of the basic premise for it. The films that we watch come from a variety of sources, primarily from a lot of PBS series. So they are professionally done, they are powerfully done, and boy, do they make the point. And we're going to show you a clip from one of them so you get a sense of that. The readings also come from a variety of sources, and we use a couple of core textbooks. One is by Howard Thurman, and it's called Jesus and the Disinherited. He's a very powerful preacher, a very powerful minister, a very powerful writer. And the other one is called Waking Up White, another surprising book to learn a lot about person in this culture. What is our work to do? Not just what is the work of everybody else, but what is our work? How do we need to be different? What do we need to do? So that's kind of how it goes. Anyone can participate who is interested. It is run by the Episcopal Church, so we have to, that's part of the issue. Carlyle and I did the one in October through February. We were all Episcopalians and we were all St. Peter's people. We are now running 2 groups, with Tom running one of the groups and with someone from All Saints, and Carlyle and I are running the other group, and we are completely mixed. So we've got St. Peter's, All Saints, St. George's, someone from St. Martha's, somebody from a church in Wilmington, St. David's in Wilmington, from St. Mary's in Bridgeville. And the goal of this is to spread it out as widely as we can throughout the diocese so that this can have a real impact. Excitingly, our very own bishop is taking the course right now with a series of bishops. So there's a lot to be done here, a lot to learn, and a lot to grow from. So I think to move us toward that direction, we'd like to show you a clip and then invite your reactions to it. It's very brief. I will caution you that the speaker's voice sometimes a little off-putting, but that's okay. And it's called The Myth of Race. It's debunking race in 3 minutes. So it is only 3 minutes, but it is chock full. So if when you're watching it, just see what surprises you or what you knew before, or maybe what you might have gotten out of it, okay? And then we'll come back and talk about it. So Jeffrey, the phantom person, there he is, okay.
You may think you know exactly what race you are, but how would you prove it if someone disagreed with you? The fact is, even though race drives a lot of social and political outcomes, race isn't real. One of the first people to attempt to categorize humans according to race was a German scientist around 1776. He came up with 5 different groups according to physical appearance and geographic origin of their ancestors. Americans of European descent eagerly bought into this type of thinking around the same time. Some historians have said the idea that there were different races helped them resolve the contradiction between a natural right to freedom and the fact of slavery. If whites were their own distinct category, then they could feel a lot better about denying freedom to people who they labeled black and decided were fundamentally different. But as political priorities change, definitions of race in America adjust right along with them. For example, if you were of Mexican birth or ancestry in the United States in 1929, you were considered white. Then the 1930 census changed that to non-white to limit immigration. Later, when the U.S. needed to increase its labor force during World War II, these people were switched back to white. And what it took to be black once varied so wildly throughout the country, from 1/4 to 1/16 to the infamous 1 drop of African ancestry, that people could actually change races just by crossing state lines. Then suddenly in 2000, the government decided that Americans could be more than one race and added a multiracial category to the census. This has left many Americans scratching their heads when it comes to selecting who they are. As many as 6.2% of census respondents selected some other race in a 2010 survey. The idea that someone might look one way and identify another way, or that they might be really hard to place in a racial category, is not new. This is why there was a public debate about whether MSNBC's Karen Finney could say she was Black, or how we can't even agree on the racial label assigned to the President of the United States. Of course, many people feel their racial identity is very clear and very permanent, but the fact that some people have changed theirs and that no one can really argue with them shows how shaky the very idea of race is. This is all because there isn't a race chromosome in our DNA that people can point to. It simply doesn't exist. When the medical community links race to health outcomes, it's really just using race as a substitute for other factors, such as where your ancestors came from, or the experiences of people who may have been put in the same racial group as you. Dorothy Roberts explains that sickle cell anemia is a prime example of this. The disease is linked to areas with high rates of malaria, which include some parts of Europe and Asia in addition to Africa. It's not actually about race at all. This, of course, does not mean that the concept of race isn't hugely important in our lives. The racial categories to which we're assigned can determine real-life experiences, they can drive political outcomes, and they can even make the difference between life and death. But understanding that racial categories are made up can give us an important perspective on where racism came from in the first place.
You're muted.
I got it. This is one of the first clips that we saw in Sacred Ground. And other than the people who've taken Sacred Ground already, I'd be curious to know your thoughts or reactions. Is there anything in it that you thought, oh yeah, that's right, or gee, that's surprising, or why do we do that, or anything like that? If anybody would be willing to be brave. Sure, Mike.
I think from a scientific standpoint, what she said was true.
Mm-hmm.
Right. From a political or a social standpoint, race is very much a factor in our relating to other people. Mm-hmm. And I would say that with Episcopals, and I'm not a cradle Episcopal by any means. I've been an Episcopal for about 10 years. Mm-hmm. With Episcopals and probably many other Christian groups, there's a big elephant in the parlor, and that is, why aren't there more people of other races participating? Why aren't they members of our group? Yeah. And I think we should really address that.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. Somebody else had her hand up. Is that you, Amy?
Yes. Yeah, I was just going to say that in another presentation, the idea of race was said to have been established in the 15th century, but the presentation today actually used a different time. Mm-hmm. Not that it makes a great deal of difference, but I just wanted to say that stood out. And also that when I like to answer the question, what is your race? I prefer to say human.
And we accept that about you too.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Anyone else? Anything else? Anybody else want to say anything? Don't be shy. To Michael's point, I think, and to your point too, Amy, yeah, I think race was established way back then when people weren't all coming from England and Scotland, at least in our own country, right? And so then there was a need to look at how we're going to differentiate people, whether it was right or wrong. But the interesting point to me is how fluid the definition is and how political the definition is. I don't know if anybody else was struck by that at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, Jody.
I'm actually watching this for next week's Sacred
Good.
Ground.
Okay, great. Yeah.
And first place, she talks very fast. So my second time listening to it, I was like, oh, okay, I understand. I hear it better now. And the next film is really fast that we're watching. But I think what surprised me was that, according to the government, the race changed. Okay, you're Black now, or you're Mexican now, and now you're white. But now you're back to that. Or you could go to this state and be another race. Okay. I think that I never realized that. So that was kind of like a wonderment or a surprise to me.
Exactly. So that rather than a biological fact, it's kind of a social construct, isn't it? And that's what's so incredible about for a lot of us, because who knew that, you know? Anybody else? She does talk fast, and that's why I cautioned you. Please, Tracy. Yeah, hi. You're muted, Tracy.
I'm just curious, was all of this, because they said around 1776, I think was the date she said, is race as a concept mostly an American concept, or is it global?
Any thoughts on that from anybody? Anybody have any thoughts? Well, yeah, go ahead, Suzanne. You're muted too. You know, someday we'll meet in person and we'll just start moving our lips without saying anything.
I thought they said that the scientist in the 1700s was German.
Yes, they did.
I didn't think it was a specific American. I think we've taken it.
But I think that,
however.
Barb, go ahead.
I think that America did race before that, because that was how we justified slavery, that the Blacks were inferior coming from Africa. And so it was okay that they were only 2/3 of a person. So I think that I think that
That's Barbara Tenney.
I think we did it more than anyone else has done it.
I think that's a really good point. I think we've taken it to beyond what it may have been in many other countries. And also, if we look at how slavery came about and we look at slavery, one of the things that you would learn through this course is how it started with indigenous people. And it was way, way back then. And some of the horrors that have happened to them throughout the centuries and still today are quite powerful and very emotional to look at. Yeah. Amy.
And speaking of horrors, the Kendi book, Ibram X. Kendi, a book on how to be an anti-racist, points out that Nazism was based on the Jim Crow of the American South.
Yes.
And that is so hard for us to even think about or accept.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Was that you, Minnie? Are you going to say something?
Yes. What I was going to say was that the slavery stuff obviously came to the Americas, but that was started by the British, the Spanish, and I believe the French, and the Portuguese. So you had multiple, countries were involved in it. And as much as we've traveled, the concept of race really kind of varies from country to country. I mean, some countries pay a lot of attention to it. Some countries do not. But yeah, America, the United States in itself has really been kind of the thing that has pushed the concept of race internationally.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks, Vinny. That's a really powerful point for people who've traveled or live in other countries. I know from my own experience through working with Peace Corps in many different places, very different definitions and very different awarenesses of those differences depending on the country you're in. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Vinny. Anybody else on that? Yeah, George.
Yeah, I believe that, the whole premise that race is an invention is a great one to start from, because that means it's not really a fact. And we have a tremendous hill to climb to prove that it's an invention and that it really doesn't exist, because 99% of the time we are talking about race, which is something which doesn't exist. So we have a massive problem that we're beginning to take on. And I think the very first step is to realize and to convince people that it doesn't exist. And I know, people who have suffered and been punished by it, and I'll say, oh yeah, it exists. Well, scientifically, it doesn't exist. It's an invention that was created to control people.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that we don't look different from each other, that we don't have different skin tones or different heights or different thises or different that's. The thing is, what are we doing with it? Really, what are we doing with that? What has that come to mean? And that is the construct that has been put down as like sort of inviolable for a lot of people, Anybody else?
Yes, I'd like to say something. Carol.
Who's that? Where's that coming from? I can't see it. Is that you, Annie?
No, it's me, Carol, up in the corner. I have my hand up.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I couldn't see you.
That's why I have my hand up. I haven't got the video on because I'm eating.
Oh, that's why I can't see you. Thank you. I feel better. Yes, please, Carol.
I just wanted to respond to Michael's question and a couple of other comments.
Sure.
I was the rector of a parish in Massachusetts about 15 years ago, and it was a pretty solidly white congregation until we suddenly began to gain new members who were from Uganda. And they kept coming. And I would get together with them as newcomers and say, welcome. And, what attracted you to St. Peter's and Weston? And it turns out that they were Anglican from Uganda. And when they went to the Black churches in Waltham, which has had a lot of Ugandans, they didn't like the churches because they were so noisy. And they found that the Anglican churches used the same hymnal and they were very respectful and quiet and procedural, et cetera, et cetera. And so, but when I met them, of course, they were from Uganda. They were from a majority Black culture. They did not have any of the same experiences of being of a different race in this country yet. I mean, they were enjoying their life in America. So it helped me to understand a little bit of the difference between the few African Americans we did have in the congregation who didn't really particularly get along with the people from Uganda. They really didn't have a whole lot in common, except that maybe their DNA was similar in some earlier century. But it was very difficult. But that's why, Michael, we had trouble getting Black people to come to our churches because the culture is sometimes very different. And they don't really particularly like the Episcopalian way of sort of calm and polite, and then looking for something more energetic and spontaneous. And so that's been my experience with why we don't often have, and sometimes you get Black people in and out of your churches because they come and they don't feel completely comfortable. And it isn't because we've been unkind to them, it's just that they just don't feel that they would fit.
That's a great point. So you look at the overlay of culture on everything else, and you just can't make assumptions about people purely on one element, right? There's so many elements that come to play. Annie, you were going to say something, I think. You're on mute though. Yeah,
there we go. It was two things. One is, I think, as most of you know, I've lived in many cultures, and wherever we were, the ability of humans to make other humans be other, and thereby gain power over them is devastating. And I saw this over and over, both with other non-original members of the society who, for instance, came in to work in Dubai, and they were the lower caste. And of course, if you look at India, there's the caste system. It's everywhere. I do believe, because I do not want to diminish how horrible the United States is, that what we did with slavery and what we have allowed that to be ever since is just ugly, ugly, ugly. But I just think it's almost built in with us. No, it can't be built in with us because we're creatures of God. But there's something that just drives people to make other people be lower. And that gives me power and that gives me confidence. And now I'm just going to go to a quick little lighter side from my teaching days, which is much more uplifting. One year in school, my kindergarten, I was the music teacher, but the kindergarten class did an experiment. And they got all the kids together, and they first of all were checking the heights of everybody, and then they were checking the eyes of everybody and the hair color and all that. Then they all took their hands, I'm going to raise my like this, and put them like this on top of each other. And they worked them, and they went from the very lightest on the bottom to the very darkest on the top. And at the end of that, their reaction was, look at that. We all have color. And I've just held on to that, yeah, we're white or black, or we just all have color.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's really great. Thank you. Anybody else for anything? What you're experiencing here in a very, very, very minor kind of way is sacred ground. So that we would be listening or watching a longer video, often maybe about an hour. And then you would be reading articles that go along with that theme. So if it's Latinx, for example, it would be things about the Latin experience. You'd be looking at a film about what it meant for the colonists to move west. What happened in California with people? What happened in Texas? What really went on as we were pushing our way and dominating people all the way across the country? If it were something on Indigenous or Native Americans, you'd see a film on that, including things on the Trail of Tears and other items. You would learn an incredible amount and read articles that go along with it. And then this kind of conversation, Carlyle and I will provide questions, facilitated conversation where we learn from one another. So that's kind of how that looks. And we're so thrilled that there are people here who are graduates of the first element of Sacred Ground to take a look at that. So Carlyle, you're muted, Carlyle. So we, as Carl said, there are a number of people here this evening who have done, as it were, the class anyway in Sacred Ground. And we've asked them if they would be willing to answer one question, which is, what has been the impact of Sacred Ground on you? And they're going to answer that any way they can, okay? What has been the impact of Sacred Ground on you? So if you'll just raise your hands and Tom?
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
All right, the impact has been that very quickly, I was raised in Mississippi as a Southern Baptist in a deeply, deeply, explicitly racist. It wasn't implied, it was an explicit racism. And so that deeply harmed me, it wounded me. Sacred Ground has helped me to continue the journey of healing and transformation from that idolatrous culture to a culture of healing and wholeness and love and the love of God. And it's been it's an extraordinary piece of dialogue and learning that the Episcopal Church, I've never seen something done so well as what the Episcopal Church has done with Sacred Ground. It's just an extraordinary bit of work.
Thanks, Tom. Minnie? You're muted too.
Yeah.
There you are.
Yeah, the thing I learned from Sacred Ground was that actually it was kind of a liberating experience for me, because frequently I'm the only Black person in things like this. And a lot of times I feel the pressure to represent all Black people. And it's like, no, I don't have to do that. And so for me, it was very liberating to not have to say, okay, I'm only representing myself. I can't speak for all Black people. But that being said, the thing that also kind of struck me was that in order for Sacred Ground to really work, we're going to need a lot more diverse voices, you know, not just Black or white, Hispanic, Asian, Indian, Native American, you know, people, more LGBTQ, more different genders, ages, political groups, you know, things like that. And so what I've been doing is trying to, as I try to have more one-on-one dialogues with people, and I try to seek out voices that are different from mine.
Thanks, Minnie.
That's fabulous, Minnie. That's fabulous.
Yeah, really. Eleanor?
I was amazed at the depth and expansion of history that I learned through this. Some I knew, some I didn't know, but it's made me much more thoughtful and aware when I'm in contact with other people now. And I'm seeing nuances of racism in places that I was not aware of before. It has really expanded myself a lot. And I think it's the most intellectual growth I've had in years.
Thank you. Suzanne?
I don't have anything new to say. I can only say that it was an incredible growth experience for me. I came into it as a former civil rights worker. I thought I kind of knew the drill, and this was just going to be a refresher course. And gosh, my eyes were opened to history I'd never heard, to, as Eleanor said, nuances. When I am with other people, I find stuff I never saw before, and I'm much more aware of the whole white privilege issue that, you know, people think we think we're really wonderful and liberal, and yet we're coming from a position of privilege that is not necessarily positive. I learned a great deal about myself, and I hear things, I see things that I didn't see before. It was an amazing growth experience.
Thank you. Anybody else? John Michael.
There are a number of, I'm not sure what I want to say, so bear with me. What this has done for me is it is raised, I won't say raised or expanded, but it's renewed my consciousness. As a child of the 60s, as Suzanne indicated, you know, been there, done that. There's no more for me to do. I've done it all. I've done everything I can do, is kind of was sort of an unfocused mindset. Since Sacred Ground, a couple of things that were said tonight even expanded that. I'm no longer going to classify myself as white when I fill out those forms. I'm going to go for the other, or whatever the box says, because given my family tree and given what we've learned in experience in Sacred Ground, I am positive, and I haven't ever had my DNA tested yet, but I'm going to. I am sure that I have Black blood, that I have Jewish blood, and that I might even have Native American blood. So that means that my identity is not part of what we now call race. I think what it's done for me is realize that as a person, and thank you, Amy, human race, good answer. As a person, it's made me much more aware of myself and my interactions with others. Not so much that I can do anything to eradicate racism, but what I can do to improve and work on my own being as I follow in the footsteps of a number of giants.
Thank you, John Michael. Does anybody else from the most recent Sacred Ground class want to say anything about impact? Okay then. Well, so you've heard from at least some of us, and thank you all for your willingness to share. I know that it also was very impactful for me and for Carol. And I would only echo some of the things that some of you have already said. I am so much more aware than I was before Sacred Ground. And I mean, it's really quite, I think, quite profound. Carol, you wanna, you're muted, Carol.
Keep doing that.
Oh God, sorry. Luckily, Carlisle's sitting nearby, so she can cue me in when I'm not listening. We just wanted to open. There are people here who have not done Sacred Ground, maybe didn't know much about it. I wondered if you had any questions that we could answer for you, because of course, we would like to entice you to come to the course that we will offer in the fall. We may have more than one group. We hope that we will. And if people want to sign up on a list, to be on a waiting list, there's already one started. We would love to have you to be added. Annie, yeah, do you want to say something? You're on the wait list, are you? No. You're muted, Annie.
Keep going the wrong place. That was going to be my question. Is there a waiting list?
There is.
Is it with Kelly, or how do we?
It's with Carlyle.
Carlyle, all right. I will take care of that immediately. Thank you.
Great, fabulous. Yeah, yeah. Anybody with any content questions or anything about it? Did you know about it before we just started talking, for those of you who have not taken it? Okay, okay. And does it appeal to you in any way? Yeah, go ahead, George.
Well, Molly and I didn't know about it, and we'd like to take it.
Okay.
You know, it's amazing from what we've heard, and I think it's, you know, it's going to be like moving a mountain. It's still, you know, a formidable challenge, but I think it's worthwhile that we work on it. You know, so where and when do we sign up?
I'll just send your name in as you want to get on the wait list for the fall, and then we'll see how many groups we have. Tom, in his generosity as one of the graduates from the last course, volunteered to be, or we kind of roped him in a little bit, but he volunteered to be a facilitator. It doesn't require professional facilitation skills, but just to be able to run a group and to kind of keep it going. Amy, are you?
Yes, I want to ask a question.
Sure, please, Amy.
Is the Harriet Tubman window connected with Sacred Grounds, or is that just something that the two of you have created?
Carlo, do you want to respond to that? You're muted.
Actually,
we're actually better at this in the course.
Harriet Tubman stands on her own, of course. And we especially love the quote that we chose to go under it. Oh, we love that.
Me too.
Anyway, actually, the conversation began in a centering prayer group. And we began talking about how there were no stained glass windows at St. Peter's that were of people of color, of any kind. They were all kind of old white people or whatever. And so that sparked a number of things. Of course, there is the Absalom Jones Chapel. That's fabulous. And Eleanor Boyce gave an icon of Absalom Jones that's in the narthex. And Carol and I decided that we love Harriet Tubman. And if you've never been to the Harriet Tubman Museum, which is near, where is it, Carol? It's, I'm losing the name of a.
Everybody knows where it is. I just lost the name too. You know the big one down by Blackwater?
I'm just too old to keep all this in my head. But anyway, it's fabulous.
Near Cambridge.
Cambridge, yeah. There you go.
Maryland.
And is near a wonderful nature preserve. So we just decided that Harriet Tubman would be just perfect. And she, for those of you who haven't seen her on Facebook or haven't been to church to see her, it's wonderful. She's in the stairwell that goes up to the chapel. And when the guys come back to finish the lighting, she will be totally lit, as it were.
24 hours a day. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
The light will never be turned off on her.
Right.
And
that is so wonderful.
Yeah, we love the way he did it, and it's it's like moving, you know.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And so I praise you for doing it. Can I say one more thing?
Yeah, go ahead. No, wait, go ahead. Go ahead, Amy. Yeah,
just one last thing about long memories. When I was a little girl, my father would, I lived in York, Pennsylvania, Dutch country, but he would go way down south and bring up truckloads of African-American folks and find jobs and housing for them. All these many, many years later, I still hear from almost all of the African-American students who were in my high school class.
Wow.
And I'm sure it has something to do with that. I just wanted to share that with you.
And I'm sure it has a great deal to do with you.
Yeah, well, perhaps. I tried to carry on his work.
Jody, what were you going to say?
All I was going to say,
moving around on the screen.
Yeah, when you asked about like reaction, and one of the reasons that I signed up for the current one is a phrase that Eleanor Boyce used in talking about sacred ground when she said it was transformational. And that spoke to me like, wow, I need to be transformed, you know? So it just spoke to me that, and I just from the little bit of reading I've done, the few videos I've looked at, I can see that this has an amazing potential for me personally to grow and be transformed, and for us as the beloved community to do that as well. Thank you, Eleanor.
Thank you. I think our time is almost up, but let me make one summary comment, if I could. What Minnie said and what John Michael said, and everybody who said it, but I think if I could paraphrase you, Minnie, what I think I heard there was, it was important, and that's more important to reach out beyond people after the course is over. And that's what you all are saying. And that is the purpose of Sacred Ground. No, we're not going to probably march forward to the Capitol and change everything, but we can change our own interactions one at a time here. And that makes an incredible difference. And the more self-aware we are about that, the better we can do it. So thank you for all of you for saying that, because it is the goal. And whether you join an organization, as we started doing the promo for the Southern Delaware Alliance, or you join other kinds of things, the work that we do here is then to go out into the community. And I'm so glad to hear that people are doing that. That's fabulous. So back to you, Carlyle, for...
Well, we're gonna close with a prayer, because we always do in Sacred Ground. So I'm going to use one of the collects from Sacred Ground. So take some deep breaths, and hopefully you'll ponder all of this in your hearts today after we're done, and think about this, and who knows what will happen next. So the Lord be with you. Let us pray. Holy God, breathe your spirit over us and all the earth, that barriers would crumble and divisions cease. Make us more fully your co-healers of this broken world. Unite us with all people in bonds of love, that the whole earth and all its peoples may be at peace. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Carlyle and Carol. It was a wonderful presentation. And as they both said, the reason we've saved this for the last is really a springboard and an invitation. And I hope all of you who haven't had a chance to participate in Sacred Ground will do it. Again, this is part of our year of inclusion and engagement. We are trying to bring ourselves into a deeper awareness of the racial divides in our own country, and how we might be agents of healing and compassion in our own time. This is not the end, and Sacred Ground is not the end. Just as Sacred Ground encourages its participants to go on and do more after they've had the experience, so too I'm hopeful that as we are on the cusp of preparing to regather, we might also redouble our efforts and look at ways that we can engage as reconcilers and healers in our own community. So thank you so much to Carlyle and Carol, and to all of our facilitators. I do have Dr. Weiss, Amy's presentation from last week, and she promises that she's going to send me her syllabus so that I can post that and include that for those of you who want to do some more reading along with her and some of the things that she shared last week. But without further ado, go have a nice, wonderful evening. Enjoy this warm weather as we contemplate and prepare to enter into the most holy season, the Holy Week of the Christian year. And God bless and thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you
Bye.
so much.
Bye,
Thanks,
everybody.
Carol and Carlyle.
Thanks, Carlyle.
Welcome. Bye.
Carlyle.
God bless all
Thank
of
you. Thank you. Night, night.